Okay, so since it looks like it's gonna probably still be a while before we're back in school, and we've got all these torn apart engines sitting in the shop that are gonna need put together pretty quickly whenever you guys do come back, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm going to use this engine here, and I'm going to go over all the parts. I'm gonna actually put it back together and show you guys in a video, kind of step by step, how to get it put back together and make it run. And then hopefully that will, one, be a good kind of review lesson for you guys while you're sitting at home. And also, when you get back, hopefully it'll help speed things up so you can use it as reference as you're putting yours back together. So I'm going to use this one. This is Lucky Group number 4 is going to have me working on their engine right now. I'm not going to leave it put together, so you're still going to have to put it together, Group 4, when you get back. But hopefully I can get it put back together and make it run so you guys can see the process. Today, what I'll do, I probably won't put much together today. I'm going to take this engine, all the pieces that they have stuffed in their drawers. I'm going to go through all those parts again and just kind of explain again as a review what they all do. And for one reason, that's obviously for review for you guys. And for another reason, this is a whole new video recording, editing thing that I've never used before. So I'm going to use it as kind of a trial run for me as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this main part right here is going to be the crankcase or the engine block. So the whole thing is the engine block, including the cylinder block. This part of it here, minus the cylinder block, is the crankcase. And then out here on the ends where you see these cooling fins sticking out and the cylinders are inside of them, these are the cylinder blocks. So the whole thing is the engine block. This part of it is the crankcase. And then out here on the ends where the cylinders are housed are your cylinder blocks. Sitting inside of here, even though we don't have the crankshaft or anything in here, there are still some parts we can look at. One right here is this governor. So we talked about in class how this is going to be sitting next to the camshaft, and the camshaft gear will connect with this gear on the governor. And as the camshaft turns, the faster that camshaft turns, the faster this will turn. And as this turns faster and faster, these wings will start to fly out, which will stick this plunger up further, which will then push on your governor arm, which will back your throttle off. So if the engine starts running too fast, this is kind of a safety feature to keep it from blowing itself up, basically. Also in this engine already is a couple parts. So these tappets are sitting right in here. So right in there are the tappets, and the tappets are going to be getting pushed on this end by the push rod, and those tappets will be sitting in next to the camshaft lobes. So as those camshaft lobes turn around in here, they will push on the tappets, which will then push on the push rods and rocker arm and open up the valve. So those are the parts that we can see in here right now. Okay, so the next part we're going to talk about, this here is the crankshaft. The end that will stick out of this side right up here, this will actually be the bottom side once we flip it back over the right direction. So this end of the crankshaft will be the PTO, will be sticking out of this end, and then this end will be the end that attaches to the flywheel. Right here in the middle, this is the crank pin journal. So this is where your crankshafts, or not your crankshafts, so where your connecting rods will attach, and then your crank gear right here will be sitting in there, and then that will turn the camshaft, which will then turn your governor. So this is the crankshaft. The next part is the camshaft that I'll show you. So here's the camshaft. Notice that the size of the gear on the camshaft is twice as big as the gear that's on the crankshaft. Okay, so that means that when the crankshaft gear turns twice, your camshaft gear will only turn once. That's because the crankshaft has to revolve 2 times for the 4 strokes. It'll take the piston up and down and then up and down as it revolves twice. But your camshaft that has these lobes on it only needs to revolve once. That's because each of these 4 lobes will control 1 valve each. So each cylinder will have 2 valves, an intake valve and an exhaust valve. So 2 valves for each cylinder, it's 4 valves. So each one of these lobes will control one of those valves. Each valve only needs to open one time, so each valve, or this only has to revolve one time to make each valve do its job at the right time. Something else to point out is that on the camshaft, hopefully the camera will pick it up decent, there's a little dot right there. That dot is a timing mark, and on your crankshaft, on the crank gear, I'm confident the camera won't pick it up here, but there's also a little dot there. When you put these back together, those dots need to line up so that your timing is correct. If those dots are not lined up, the valves won't open at the right time according to where the piston is, and the engine will not run right if it runs at all. Next part we've got here is on top here. This is the piston. So the piston obviously will be going up and down in the cylinder, making the engine move. There's 3 rings on here. The top ring is the compression ring that will contain the compression and combustion up inside the combustion chamber. The middle ring is a wiper ring, so that will help contain some of that compression, and it will do a little bit of oil scraping. And this bottom ring is the oil ring, so that's going to help bring oil up the cylinder, but then scrape it back down before the combustion would burn that oil up. This part here is the connecting rod. So the connecting rod is just going to attach your piston to the crankshaft. And then this is called the connecting rod cap, and that just goes around the crankshaft to hold the connecting rod around it. Another part here, this is the crankcase cover. So it would just sit here on top of the crankcase like so, bolted down. So that will also be where the crankshaft will come out for your PTO. And you can see in here that this, get this in here, this part here is that governor arm. So when that governor comes out and pushes out because it's going too fast, it will push on this lever and make it move. And then that will make this throttle arm move to adjust the throttle. Okay, so the next parts that I want to go over are the valve train components. So valve train components are going to start with the camshaft, which would be sitting in here rotating, and the lobes of the camshaft will be pushing on each of these tappets at different times. When it pushes on a tappet, that tappet will then come up. See the rocker arm here. So not rocker arm, push rod. The tappet will come up and push the push rod up as well. That push rod then will come up, and the push rod will push on the rocker arm that you can see here. So the push rod would come up through here and push on the rocker arm to make this come up, which would then push this side down. And when it pushes down, it will push down on the valve, and it will make the valve, it's down here, it'll make this valve open up. Then once the camshaft rotates away from the tappets, the valve spring will pull everything back shut and close the valve. All this whole part together, this main block part, this is called the cylinder head. And in between the cylinder head and the cylinder, you will have the head gasket, cylinder head gasket. So this gasket is very important. It helps to seal up the combustion chamber between the cylinder and the cylinder head. And it also helps transfer some heat away as well, because there's a lot of heat obviously generated right there where the combustion's happening. So it helps transfer some of that heat to these cooling fins too. So those are the main parts: the camshaft, to the tappets, to the push rod, to the rocker arm, to the valve, and the valve spring closes everything shut. And the cylinder head and the head gasket there. Okay, these are the final parts that I'm going to go over for this video lesson. There's obviously a whole lot more parts that go into an engine, but these are just going to be the last main parts that we're going to talk about today. So this is the flywheel. This is going to attach to the end opposite the PTO on your crankshaft. So flywheel here. On the flywheel, we've got some important things to note. On this one, there are some teeth that go all the way around. Those teeth are going to be connected to a gear on the starter. So when the starter turns, it's going to grab onto these teeth to turn the flywheel, which will then turn the crankshaft, move the piston, and get everything started and in motion. So that's how the starter connects to the flywheel that actually makes the engine turn on and start working. There is a magnet right here, and that magnet is going to have this armature or magneto sitting right next to it. They're not actually going to be touching. There's going to be a small air gap that we'll talk about when we put this back together, but this armature or magneto will be sitting right next to the flywheel, and as the flywheel turns, that magnet will pass next to that armature and create an electric current, which will then run down this cable to your spark plug. So this is the spark plug, so the cable will connect to spark plug, and the spark plug will be sitting in the cylinder above the piston. So when the piston brings all those gases and compresses them up at the top of the combustion chamber, the spark plug will make a spark, ignite everything, and make the piston go back down. So that's a spark plug. On these engines, sitting underneath the flywheel, is this alternator. So what the alternator does, it's got a bunch of copper coils like what is inside of the armature, but what these are going to do is they're going to create an electric current as well, and they are going to send somewhere else in the engine. So for example, it would go to keep a battery charged, and the reason that this engine would need a charged battery, like a push mower doesn't need a battery because the only electricity that it uses, unless it has an electric start, is for the spark, and that spark electricity is created from the armature. What this engine is probably more likely on is something like a riding lawnmower, which would have a couple different uses for electricity outside of just the spark from the spark plug. So one of those uses would be for the starter, so it would need power from the battery to keep the starter so it has power to actually make the engine turn. And another thing that this would need power for is it has an electric fuel shutoff solenoid. So what a fuel shutoff solenoid does is it's going to sit in the fuel system in the carburetor, which we haven't gone over much, but it's going to sit in there, and basically it's got a little plunger, and when that plunger has no power, it's going to be sticking out and it's going to close off the fuel supply line. When there is power, that power is going to suck that plunger back and allow fuel to pass through. So that electricity created from your alternator is going to allow electricity to get to that fuel shutoff solenoid to open it up to allow fuel to flow through the system for your engine to run. That is all of the parts that I want to go over for now. I'm going to post this video along with a couple questions to go along with it on the classroom page. And then in the next video, my plan is to actually start putting this together and giving some just tips and guidelines on how to get everything together correct so that it runs.